Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's health and wellness session. We are so excited to have Dr. Rose Shelton back, who will be leading today's facilitation on anger management and the art of letting go. So if you had not had time to grab a pen, paper, please sit back, relax, stay hydrated, of course, and enjoy today's session. Dr. Shelton, I'm turning it over to you, and I'm going to pin you on our screen.
Okay, well, thank you all for being here. I am going to share my screen. Actually, let me make sure PowerPoint is on. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So yes, today we will be talking about anger management. Anyone know why anger management is so important? And what anger really is?
I think because it helps us to control the mix of emotions. To me, sometimes anger feels like a mix of everything, all the emotions in one.
Yeah, so anger is a mix of thoughts, feelings, and a whole lot of other things. And it really is a natural and universal emotion. It has purpose. It has importance. It's sending us a message. Usually that message is what's happening, right? What's going on, right? Are we going to make it out of whatever this occurrence is? It sometimes gives us direction, right? To fight, to flight, to freeze. We as human beings actually are survival mechanisms. We have made it, right, past dinosaurs and other animals that have gone extinct because we actually have an instinct to survive by any means necessary, right? So one of the reasons we've been able to do that is because we do actually have that mechanism that feels like anger, but it's actually a secondary emotion that comes from and is stemmed from anger and fear of different threats that naturally occur around us. So it is a secondary emotion. It's not a first one, because a lot of times people are so angry. Actually, they're fearful, they're sad, they're going through some things, right? That's what we are actually experiencing. And the anger is the feeling that can sometimes become an action. And that's when anger becomes problematic, when it becomes an assertive, aggressive action, because we've not dealt with the first or secondary emotion that has triggered the anger mechanism, right? So secondary emotions are fears, threats, feelings of injustice, frustration, not knowing what's going on, obstacles that we have in our lives and not knowing what to do about them, sadness, feelings of loss, feeling vulnerable. There are lots of people that just don't like to be vulnerable. And sometimes, being really honest, we have dynamics in our society that tell us who should and who should not be vulnerable. So sometimes I have my guys that don't like to be vulnerable because they've been conditioned and told that vulnerability is not a positive thing, right? So that's an uncomfortable feeling. A lot of times people in general feel uncomfortable and have not been conditioned or told that being uncomfortable is natural and okay, right? It just means I don't know. So when we're uncomfortable, it feels like we're not being accepted, right? So the lack of acceptance, confusion on why this is happening, the lack of control in general, these are the things that sometimes cause that fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or that anger mechanism to trigger. If not addressed, it can get out of control. And that's why we're managing the anger, because it is a feeling that has lots of power behind it that can cause our bodies to behave and act in ways to try to gain the control that logic will not or has not been asked to come in and assist us in gaining clarity. So emotions that come, right, with this emotion comes with large surges of energy, desiring change of whatever's happening. And so this is causing a physiological as well as a biological change. So we'll feel our heart rates, we'll feel blood pressure increasing, And energy hormones like adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol actually release themselves during the process of fear and the fears of threat that trigger that anger, right? And it has the ability literally to drive us into unhealthy situations and circumstances, right? So this can cause internal events, right? The things happening with our bodies, as well as external events, right? So interactions that might not be so positive, but also the thing we're trying to prevent in managing the feeling of anger is the aggression and the negative outcomes that can come without managing the feeling. And I keep saying the feeling because anger is a feeling, it is an emotion that creates a feeling. In managing the feeling, we can make sure that it does not become a behavior that can destroy whatever our intention is by trying to gain control in the feeling, and not the logical dynamic of the situation. And this is different for everyone, right? Not, oh yes, so this is different for everyone. Not everyone responds to obstacles a certain way. Not everyone responds to loss in a certain way. A lot of times we've been conditioned or taught or learned patterns and behaviors from others. So it's going to be different for everyone how we deal with anger. So learning to manage it is always important because we're not always taught how to effectively manage it, and that managing it is a beneficial thing for us long term. All righty. Anyone know different types of anger? There's more than one kind of anger. It doesn't seem like it would be, but it is. Anyone heard of more than one way of being angry or presenting anger?
Is rage a form of anger? Is that a different type of anger?
It is a stage of anger.
Oh,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And so I bring up different types because anger has a negative, it has a negative narration, right? But sometimes it can be beneficial. The problem is we're not learning how it can be beneficial and then how it can be detrimental. So that's what management is really about, is knowing the difference between the types, the stages as you are talking about, because if we know the stages, if we know the types, then management becomes possible. When it all just feels like this emotion, right? This intangible emotion we're trying to grasp, it doesn't feel like it's possible to manage it. So types of anger are passive aggressive. How many people have heard about passive aggressive, right? And it's also like very negative, right? People's like, oh, they're so passive aggressive. They're so passive aggressive. Might be. And sometimes they should be, right? So passive aggressive, we have open aggression, which is what anger has been painted as. Anger has been painted as open aggression, but that's just the type. That's the one we're trying to prevent. But passive aggressive is one, and assertive anger is another. So passive aggressiveness is a behavior that involves acting indirectly aggressive rather than directly aggressive, right? Sometimes this is procrastination, expressing sullenness, acting stubborn. This could be a little kid that folds his arm and walks slowly out the room because they can't tell mom what he really thinks or feels, right? Like he's passively aggressively letting you know he did not like what you did or said, right? So that's beneficial. It saved his hide, right? But it can also be kind of negative when we are in leadership positions, right? And we don't put forth the promotion because we did not like what Sally said last week. So I'm going to slow down the paperwork and impact her promotion, right? If we make sure we don't send the email until 30 minutes before the other person has to get out of the office, right? Like those types of things are passive aggressive, and those are the negative aspects of being passive aggressive that a lot of times people think about. I'm angry and therefore I cause harm, right? So just because it's not a physical harming does not mean it's not an emotional and mental harming, right? So harm is always a thing we're trying to prevent with anger. having anger is not negative. It's what we do with it that can be problematic, right? So making sure we're honest about the emotional and mental harm that we sometimes cause, and if we are mentally and emotionally being harmed by someone else's passive aggressive nature or patterns and behavior. And a lot of times people are waiting for open aggression before they will intercede on situations where harm is coming from, right? So, well, they didn't really do anything. Well, did they put their hands on you, right? So we're always looking for the open aggression. But passive aggressiveness can be just as harmful and make a person feel like their life will be stopped, or promotions will be prevented, or money will stop, right? And then how will I feed my children, and how will I get the things that right? So understanding sometimes when things are happening and it doesn't feel like a full assault, it sometimes feels that way, and we still will bring up the same anger and frustration, and then that interaction can sometimes explode. So even though there are different types of anger, it can still trigger us to operate in the same way, right? As if someone did punch us in the face, because it feels like a punch in our lives. Right. So being really honest about those things on what we're doing to others and what others are doing to us, so that even though there's not a physical open aggression, we can still be mindful. I'm becoming angry because, right, like naming what it is that we're afraid of that's happening, so that we can start to figure out, how can I get clarity on dealing with this? How do we really solve this problem? Can I solve this problem? Do I need help? Because I literally feel myself being just as angry as if this person did say something or do something to me. So open aggression, we all know, problematic. We're always trying to stop that. There's legal implications, there's physical implications, there's all kinds of implications with open aggression. And so we all kind of know that's the one we definitely want to manage and prevent ourselves not getting there. Assertive anger. So assertive anger is actually, it's not so much a negative, but it's a definite protective measure where people feel that something is happening to them, and the only thing they have is their ability to be assertive, to stand up for themselves, because they feel threatened, they feel attacked, they feel ignored. This is not always problematic, because sometimes people are being bullied, some people are being taken advantage of. So we have to be mindful and ask questions when we're helping people to process their anger. Are they feeling threatened because there is a threat? So are they being the aggressor, or are they asserting themselves because they feel like something's happening to them? And a lot of times what we will find in what I do in my practice is that when people have felt helpless and powerless for a long time, everything feels like assertiveness is necessary. So we will often have assertive training so that they learn what's assertive, right? Putting in a boundary, right? Establishing boundaries and conversations of protection versus responding and echoing the anger you're receiving, right? Because when you mirror and you kind of echo the anger you're receiving, it's only escalating, and eventually it will end up in whether it's a verbal or a physical situation, right? So learning what assertiveness is, which is protecting yourselves with boundaries and standards and expectations. It also, in the assertive dynamic, you learn what's really happening, to be aware and mindful of what's happening, and accepting that some of that might not happen. So it's okay to walk away, right? So I have said and I've done what I needed to. I've established a boundary that this is not acceptable. And then I get to walk away. I don't have to prove to the other person that they should respect me, that they should hear me, right? I can't make people change their minds, right? But I can say this is not acceptable. After I've done that, that's it. Otherwise, we're going to be in a tangle, right? So anger can be fueled by people, that can be fueled by events, memories, personal problems, and trauma triggers. And I've said fueled, right? Because it literally is adding fuel to something that's already there. But what we learn with anger is that a lot of times it's starting within us, right? We come in and people will say things and we're like, whoa, you know, I have already said no one's ever going to talk to me that way, or wow, the last time this happened, it didn't work out well for me, right? So we have to be mindful too that the reason anger often comes up, it's because it's in the subconscious mind, and it remembers all the other times that things have happened to us, and it's afraid it's going to happen again, right? So it can be fueled by all these things, but in managing your anger, you can sometimes recognize it feels that way. It's not actually happening. So how do I ground myself in this moment, in this present moment, and realize this is not going to change all of the other times I've had this experience, but what I can do is make sure no more harm happens to me, where I can either say something, walk away, take some time, or find a way of calming this down. Any questions? Sources of anger. Anybody know their source of anger? I know a lot of times right now, the mask mandates, COVID numbers up, COVID numbers down, in the office, back virtual, hybrid, no longer hybrid, like all of the changes and the ups and downs that are happening in our country right now, people having all kinds of changes in their jobs, right? Like being virtual or being hybrid, that's a lot of change, especially if you have other things like children, or you're a caretaker for elderly parents. Like there's so many things that are constantly changing that you don't have control over. So life itself can sometimes feel like full trigger, right? So sometimes people are just now realizing that inconsistency can be a source of their anger, right? It wasn't before because they lived a very consistent life. Even during the pandemic, it was very consistent. Now we're trying to figure out who we are now, and we're realizing we're not going to go backwards. So people are trying to figure out what does change look like and how is change going to impact them. So it's becoming a source of anger because it has disappointment, it has frustrations, judgments, right? Judgments of who's wearing a mask and who's not, judgment of who goes in the office and who's required to go in the office and who gets to stay home, right? So people are feeling threatened in many different ways. It's a financial impact. Not everybody has recovered. Sometimes people are living with people that they really don't like, but they have to because they're family or they're the closest person. I've had people that are just now seeing family members that have been out of the country, that were on vacation when everything shut down, and they had to stay in places and with people they didn't know, they didn't like, and some did not even speak the same language or have the same cultural norms, right? So it was a lot, right? So you never know, your safety and your consistency feels threatened. The unknowns don't make you feel comfortable. People being different and having different views makes you feel like rejection is occurring, and somehow you're on the outs of what should be. Unknowns in general, right, make people very fearful, and fear really is one of the main sources of anger. I don't know, right? And sometimes it's really hard for people to just accept they don't know. So stages of anger, you're talking about the rage. So anger is not really a 0 to 60 type of experience. It's a buildup, right? People start off kind of being annoyed by things. There are irritations. And then all of a sudden, those irritations and those annoyances don't get dealt with effectively. And so then people become frustrated. And then they feel powerless. This is not going to stop. This is going to be a regular thing, a continuous thing. They feel hostile towards, or sometimes they feel hostility from. And then that brings up biases, right? Those generalizations that sometimes we have, it must be because of this, it must be because of that. And then sometimes it feels very personal. So then people start to wonder, is this only me? I'm the only one going through this, right? It feels very personal. And so they feel like the experience itself is a biased experience. And that creates a lot of the rage, right? Because it doesn't feel like there's an out. Awareness and knowledge is power in managing anger. if you can put in fail safes and kind of reroute your thoughts and feelings in this process through the stages, then you can prevent yourself from getting to the rage. Meaning, if I realize this is an annoyance and an irritation, and I recognize I'm getting extremely frustrated to the point I want to say something or do something, okay, I need to start to think about how I can change this, or how I need to look at this different, or who can I talk to help me to see myself out of this very, very, very narrowing experience that is bringing on a full feeling of anger and rage. And so the cycle, that cycle in the escalation phase, those stages are in the escalation phase. So there's escalation phase, explosion phase, which is that outward aggression that we're always concerned about, and then post-explosion phase. And so if we really think about the outcomes of post-explosion phase, sometimes that can be a way of rerouting and establishing a de-escalation process for ourselves in the escalation phase itself, right? So escalation, it really is just, sometimes we're in denial that it's actually happening. And then sometimes we feel we're being discounted when we're talking about what's irritating us and what's bothering us. And so if that's happening, you can begin to feel the buildup in the words that you say and the way that you're responding, right? Is it a little passive aggressive right now? If it's passive aggressive, that's still a red flag, right? Before it gets to the open aggression aspect, right? So we feel the increased hostility, intimidation sometimes, more frequent and intense feelings of anger to and from people, places, circumstances, and situations. And sometimes people will feel intimidated where they don't want to address the mild irritations, but that's really important to start to address around there so that we don't escalate to the point where we get to rage, because once we get to rage, you're literally teetering on explosion, right? And you can't stop yourself because this is a biological and physiological experience you're having. And if you don't learn how to manage yourself at levels where it is manageable, then it becomes almost like this uncontrollable experience that you're being taken on a ride, right? By your own thoughts, feelings, and mind, because all of that is coming along with you, right? Like you're literally physically feeling it, you're thinking about it, you're talking about it, all parts of you and all of your senses are fully engaged. As you're escalating, there's no way that you're not going to then behave and operate in what you're thinking, feeling, and focusing on, right? So in the explosion phase, there's physical and verbal aggression, the thing we're all trying to prevent. Discharge of all of the tension from all of those hormones and all of those subconscious thoughts. A lot of times we're not just dealing with the moment, we're dealing with all of the moments that it felt like this, right? And that's why the explosion and the outward aggression can be really dangerous, because I'm not just having an argument or an interaction or even a fight about this moment. I'm literally having a fight about every time someone has done this to me. So just think about that. If I have had this experience 10 times, and then this person in front of me is saying something that triggers all of those 10 times, and then I fight with them, I'm fighting literally 10 times as strong and as hard as they are, because they're having this fight with me once. I've had it in my head 10 times. There's no way this fight is not going to be intense. Right. So in thinking about that, and then thinking about the post-explosion where the guilt and the shame, and you finally get clarity and you realize it was not that serious. It was a whole lot of other things that were happening to me in this moment. We start to have recriminalization and punishment, apologies, repairs, promises, and then the impacts on our lives, on our families, on our futures, on ourselves, right? Like all of that's happening in that post-explosion phase. So a lot of times I tell people to think about the actual explosion phase and what will happen in that post-explosion phase, because that can help you to inform your escalation phase, de-escalation process. Anybody have a de-escalation process that they use now or have had to use?
A lot of times it's really just saying, coming up with an agreement, especially with people that you sometimes are intimate with or close to in your family life. You literally come up with a kind of a policy. If we ever get to these incendiary moments, we're going to take a time out so that we can come back, because we always know we want to get to that closure, conflict resolution side of it. But at the same token, we just know it's like a signal. You get the little timer out. We're taking a break, and we might go for a walk. We'll revisit it because we have respect to come back to revisit it, to hear each other out. So taking a walk.
Yes, yes, yes. That's a really good one. And sometimes with my couples, I'll have them do safe words, right? We're safely trying to protect this relationship. If we keep doing or saying some things, we'll go to a point of no return. It's hard to love someone who has triggered all of the worst things right about you and said some of the things that you have shared your secrets, right? And now they're strumming your pain with their finger with this horrible song of litanies of what it is you are not and have not done, right? So sometimes we'll have safe words. In families, the same thing. Families are really important. And with family and in couples, that's because we live there, right? If my home, my emotional home is not safe, and it doesn't feel mentally and emotionally safe to express and to share, then I have no place, right? So a lot of times it's really important to put some kind of de-escalation process in place so that you can say the thing that makes you feel the safest, and it is the thing that is your protection. And so this, like, the anger itself is a response of protection. When it's not managed, it literally creates the opposite, right? It destroys protection and it prevents you from feeling protected, right? We thought the feeling was going to bring the protection. And I mean, the outward expression of the feeling would bring the protection, but it actually destroys that because it's like an explosion. It blows up everything in the room, right? So finding a way to kind of tell ourselves to calm it, to focus, to think about what's really happening and ground ourselves in the moment and maybe around the subject and topic instead of about all the other things and all the other happenings, really important in saving ourselves, saving our lives, saving our families. And this also works with work, right? We are here, we have an intention. Sometimes our jobs are a means to an end, right? To take care of ourselves and our families. So being really mindful and telling ourselves, right, this log, right, this kind of like brick in the road, this problem, which I call bricks in the road and logs, not worth the goal I'm trying to achieve, right? So once I have a long-term vision, right, for myself and for others, it becomes really easy to create that de-escalation process to kind of turn yourself around in those stages before you get to rage and start moving into that explosion phase. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay, so external and internal triggers. Anyone know what their triggers are?
That's the whole thing, really understanding what the trigger is, just sitting in. But that's, I guess, the skill set there is to, in the moment, be able to sort of observe yourself and say, what's really going on here? But to know and really identify your triggers and be aware of it is very difficult. But I guess that is one of the keys, I guess, to managing the anger, really realizing what it is. So like you said, a trigger might not be in that current moment. It's the concatenation of other problems you've experienced in your life that you're dragging into the problem. So, but being aware of them and identifying them to let other people know what your triggers are, I think is important too. Yeah. So that they are aware that this is going to be a touchy issue. If you do something this way, this is going to probably be the way I'll react, as a kind of knee-jerk reaction. So, but it's like peeling the layers of the onion away. Okay, what's
Yes.
really going on? But anyway, that I guess that's the skill set, to sit there and have the ability to, wait a minute, start peeling the layers of the onion away. What's really underneath this emotion I'm feeling right now? You know.
Yes, yes. And so when we realize we have triggers, it is easier to manage them and to let go of things so that we can actually move toward whatever the real need and want is, or figuring out if I can actually get it within this place, the circumstance, situation, or with this person. And so for me, I work with so many specific and diverse populations. I already know when people say really ignorant things and intentional harmful things, well, it's a trigger for me, right? Like, and then I bring my facts and all my statistics, right? I am not the one to take all the jokes, right? Like some jokes just are not funny to me, right? So my family and my friends also know, like, if Rose is down there with the face, she's not going to have it. She's either going to correct you or she's leaving, right? Like she's not going to sit here with the foolishness, right? So I know that, right? And I'm okay with people realizing that I might have to walk away. Like this might not be the table for me, right? So persons, situations, right? Worry and preoccupation of problems and other impacts. Some people, they cannot listen to the news and then go to work. Right? They cannot look at their stock portfolio and then go to work, right? Sometimes people, you have to know what it is that you're worried and concerned about, and so that you can also be mindful when your mind is on something else, and when people are saying things to you, it's not them, it's you dealing with some of your things internally and still trying to figure out what the answers are, and they just kind of interrupted you in that process. And you're in that I don't know, right? I don't know. Memories, triggers, past traumas. Traumas are really big triggers. A lot of times, especially if things have happened to us when we were children, we think because we're older, we're fine. And I hear a lot of people say, oh, I'm past that. And then you talk with them and you're watching them literally, physically and physiologically move and respond to certain conversations in a way where you realize it's not dealt with. It's really still fresh. It's a trigger, right? And they're not just advocating for others when they're engaging in some arguments. They are angry, and their anger is not fueled from the moment. It's fueled from their own history. Right. So sometimes we have to really be honest about our internal and external triggers so that we really can let circumstances and situations go. Because if not, we'll hold on to them, not realizing we're fighting our past in our present moment. So symptoms. So another thing to be aware of, right? So we can, we know that we physically feel anger. And this is one of the ways we can become mindful that we are moving through those stages of anger, because our body is starting to let us know through symptoms, right? So fight, flight, freeze, fawn, but not fawn doesn't really show up in anger. It shows up mostly just in fear, but fight, flight, freeze are protective responses, right? And so it starts to show up in these symptoms because it's trying to get your body to prepare for an action or a shutdown. Right. So clenching jaws or fists, and increased heart rate, flushed face, shaking, feeling hot. This is also important for people to pay attention to individuals around them, because if what I'm saying is making you respond this way, there's something I don't know, right? We might need to stop this conversation. Crying, being withdrawn, nausea, loss of appetite, mind racing. Because this is a survival mechanism, that tunnel vision of survival it will shrink your clarity quick, fast, and in a hurry, right? And sometimes people will begin to feel like they're blacking out. Like they're like, I can't seem to get my thoughts together. I can't seem to focus, right? Everyone seems like a blur in the room, right? Something's happening with your body. You're being bothered, you're being triggered. And sometimes people will rationalize and be in denial of this process and say, well, it's just this, it's just this. Well, if your body starts to respond, that means you're not being honest, that you really are angry. And anger has such a negative connotation. People will literally lie to themselves that they're not angry, but you can't stop anger from being its full self. It will show its nature, even if you lie to yourself that it's present, right? So some people will have these responses, feeling out of control. Some people get louder and they're like, I'm just really passionate about it. Okay, so let's go underneath. What's under there that makes you want to be louder because you think that I'm not understanding, right? So there's something under there, being more quiet than usual, right? Like that passive aggressive part, right? They're shutting down. I'm not being heard. You're not worth it. But what I will do is have a whole conversation about you and what should be happening here, right? So they're becoming more quiet. They're not being seen or heard. And the truth is, a lot of times when people are dealing with anger, when we're dealing with anger, we don't feel heard, we don't feel seen, we don't feel understood, right? We feel very alone. So we have to be honest about that. There's nothing wrong with being honest about who you are, where you are, how you're feeling. You are a human being. There's no way that you're not impacted by life's experiences, the happenings around you, and what people say. So a lot of times I will have, so a lot of times we hear about angry people can't make you angry, right? They're not making you angry. They are kind of strumming some of that pain. But words are really powerful, and we discount the power of words. Right? If it was not powerful, we would not be using them to make laws and policies, right? So, so words have a lot of power. They make or break. They establish value. They take it away, right? People with power and positions that use words can literally take away value, can marginalize, can discriminate, and can establish biases, right? So words are really powerful. And when people use words to kind of cut at the core of who a person is, there's no way that a person is not going to physiologically, mentally, and emotionally have a feeling about that, right? So being mindful about what we do and say to others, but also being really honest with ourselves that it does hurt, allows us the ability to recognize that hurt, deal with what's going on with that, but also realize the person that's doing and saying this, they don't actually value me. There's no amount of fighting that's going to change that. That's who they are. So then I can release any expectation of them being different. And now I just have to do the work for me to use my words to build myself up in the way that I need it, because I have recognized by their words and their actions, they don't have capacity, capability, or the desire. Right? So it's empowering to know, right? Wisdom and knowledge is very empowering. Any questions? Any thoughts? All right.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to squint. Hello, my name is Samuel Trinidad, and I had to step away because I had an emergency phone call, but I am back. I do have a question. I do tend to squint, and I tend to grind my teeth out of anxiety sometimes, but it's not anger. And when I squint, it's because I don't understand what the person is telling me, and many people take that as me being angry, and I have to explain to them that I am not angry. Because I don't suffer from angry episodes. I mean, it takes a lot for me to really get angry at a person. But I found this meeting kind of interesting, and I wanted to check it out.
Yeah, you know, thank you for that. Squinting and grinding. So if you just kind of think about that part, it's in the head, you're receiving the information, right? You're hearing it and you're seeing it. When people kind of squint, that's exactly what you're doing. You're trying to make sense of it. You're trying to generalize whatever this concept is that they're saying as it's coming into your eye and ear, right? Like you're taking them in, which means you're reading their body language, you're reading how they're presenting this information. And then the grinding is almost like, imagine like typing, right? Like you're trying to process and type it like a computer, right? So you're grinding your teeth to kind of take in the verbal aspects of it, while also taking in the nonverbal through the body language, right? So it's good that you recognize that, but also that you can accept that it's not anger. So there's no need to even push back when people say it. It's like, it's the way that I process information, trying to understand, I'm taking in what you're saying, right?
Thank you.
Yep, yeah.
Got
Yeah. Anyone else? Yes. I can't hear you, I'm sorry. I see your lips moving, Melissa, but I still can't hear you.
What's wrong?
I can hear you.
Now?
Yes.
Yes, no, I just wanted to ask you a question because like some of the stuff, like that you've been saying has spoken to me, and not just, me, but I would just like to know like how to kind of like help somebody that's dealing with some of the stuff that I may be dealing with, because like like some of the stuff that you mentioned, like you may be living with somebody that, it might be a little bit difficult and the situation might be a little bit, uncomfortable. But then like, like in the past, like I've been in positions, in jobs where it was kind of stressful. So, like how you said, like your home sometimes can be like your peace, your place to get away from, mentally, to kind of go through what happened throughout the day and try to like figure out a better way. But I used to be like in situations where it's just like I wasn't getting peace at work, and and then I was going home and then I wasn't getting that peace, either. So I felt like it was kind of, affecting how I would interact with people, because like you said, like I noticed at times like I would get kind of short in a sense. So it's just like, how would I be able to like help somebody? Like, cause I'm like, when I was going through that, I know that wasn't like a great feeling. And I just want to know, like, in case somebody is going through that, how would you handle it? Or is there a way to handle it?
So it's hard to make that determination for the other person, because people have to want to be helped, right? And they have to want to be open to a different way of processing and dealing with things. You could let them know that I've been there, I understand, you can share from your perspective, right? Using I statements, I know I've been there. In my experience, this is what I was thinking and feeling. Not quite sure if you are, but if you are, I'm here to talk about it, to maybe share some things that I've used for myself, right? And in this, mindfulness, meditation, yoga, like different things that people take on. You can say that those things have helped you. If it doesn't work for them, right? Some people it doesn't. I'm willing to assist you in exploring some things that really work for you, because once I've taken on these coping mechanisms, they've been really beneficial, right? Sometimes sharing that story and from the I perspective, and then opening the door for the other person to maybe think about it. It not only puts them in a place of empowering, but it lets them know that you're an ally, but you're not assuming and you're not projecting what they need to do.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say something. It's interesting too, in these kinds of situations when there is a lot of conflict and it's, attenuating your peace at home or whatnot. It almost seems like with anger management, part of it is learning how to manage it within yourself, but also, like you say, trying to help someone else managing their anger. And it's almost like the same skills you've got to learn within yourself to, again, identify your feelings. What am I feeling? And then discussing, I'm feeling really tense. When you tell somebody else that you're angry, I'm just feeling really tense. You sort of bring out in some of the aspects of the things that you're worried about or anxious about in that given moment. And then you model back to the person who's angry and aggressive. And you might say the same thing. It sounds like in this moment, you're pretty upset. You're pretty angry with me, or you're making me angry, but you might be really frustrated for some reason, whatever it is. So it's almost like you're trying to, in that dyadic relationship, use the skills that you're learning to manage your own anger, but then trying to help someone else to see emotionally, or at least register emotions that you're experiencing. So it's almost like bringing a more authentic conversation together between people who are having a difficult time. But sometimes I think it's just like expressing what you're feeling. I'm feeling this way, rather than saying, you're making me mad. I'm the blame game. You always do this to me. Why do you do this? It's more like trying to get into the exploration moments between people in a conflict. So it's like you're learning to manage your own anger. At the same token, you're learning to teach somebody else the vernacular of using words and emotions to express what they're feeling in that moment. So you come to a joining about how you're impacting each other in a negative way.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely like a mirror situation. So as I'm exposing myself in the mirror, that person begins to see themselves. And that's what, and then people can choose. A lot of times we don't take on what other people are saying, but we will choose to take whatever it is that we're seeing and hearing, and then make sense of it for ourselves. Yeah. So the brain is affected. So this is how the brain and the body are affected by anger. So anger moves through the brain into the body, and then it activates the amygdala. And it happens before you even are aware of it, right? Like you can literally be in the process not even knowing. And I call the amygdala Amy, right? Because this is where the memories are encoded and regulation of emotion happens. And I call it Amy because Amy does not forget anything, and she will not allow what happened already to happen again, right? So the amygdala is kind of like triggering itself, and when the body's anger mechanism is triggered, the amygdala of the brain becomes turned. It turns on the stress response system in the brain and in the body, and if we don't handle it, it's like a fire being turned up and constantly being fueled, right? So when this happens, this chain reaction of hormones are released into the body and responds to these stressors or perceived threats. This is that fight, flight, freeze, fawn experience. But when it's released, the hormones quickly impact the neurons in the cells, right? So that's why we got the tunnel vision. It's hard to think because it's literally taking over the brain's processing, because we don't have time to think about how pretty the flowers are. And if it's raining, we need to know, do we need to take care of what's happening or get away? And it's hard to stop this chain reaction when it's fueled, which is why it's important to start early. Figure out what you're thinking, what you're feeling. Why are we thinking and feeling this way, right? In those early stages, really asking yourself hard questions so that we don't move into the negative aggression. Anger is a feeling, aggression is not anger. We're trying to stop the aggression, right? But the feeling that anger brings, we're trying to get to that message. Why are some people able to manage more? Learn and practice patterns, right? Building coping mechanisms, finding out what our real issues are that's underlying, and really learning how to have conversations with ourselves, practicing coping mechanisms like breathing and mindfulness, and whether it be yoga and exercise. Communication, effective communication, really important, because it allows us to really put words to feelings so that the emotion doesn't really take over. Because once the emotion takes over the brain, then you're just moving from that feeling. Feelings don't actually have facts. Feeling is just a movement to get the body to go, but they're not facts. So just learning and practicing coping mechanisms is really important. And also being honest. Outward showing is no different than inward holding, right? So inward holding is a long, slow burn, which is why sometimes look like it's going to 0 to 60. They've been slowly burning inward. People that show outward, it's the exact same anger, it's the exact same process, right? So no matter what, we have to find out what's fueling what's going on with us when the feelings are present, so that we can stop ourselves from moving to outward aggression and rage, and move within our lives with the freedom, but also the honesty that anger brings, right? The awareness. Tolerance levels come from history, from our traumas, cultural norms, societal norms, sometimes religious norms, and learned processes, right? So it's really important to learn how to manage and know what we're managing by allowing the anger to speak to us about us and what's going on with us and why this is a problem, instead of just trying to get the person or the situation handled. Deciphering the anger will help us to prevent the aggression. Taking time out, giving yourself or the other person space to calm down. Sometimes that's with a safe word. Sometimes it's literally recognizing we're in the workplace, or, I don't know, we're at church or a temple, right? Like, so whatever it is, to say, listen, this is not the place. This is not the time. Let's take some time, figure out what's going on. Maybe we'll talk later today, or maybe we'll talk tomorrow. Check to understand what's underneath and fueling your anger. Right? If this person is bothering you, what was it specifically that was bothering you? Was it the tone? Was it because this person has done this multiple times? What's going on with this situation that causes you to feel the way that you're feeling? Do you feel discounted? Do you feel unheard? Do you feel dismissed, right? Is this, whatever this is, right, really getting to the core of that, because that's going to empower you to realize this person might not have the answer, so the fight with them is not going to bring resolution, right? Are there ways I can address the anger away from this situation or person? 9 times out of 10, it's probably best, because they don't have solutions either. They're just as heated, right? And sometimes just as unaware on why this is a problem. Can the other person be a part of the solution or not? That's a real honest question. Now, if they're family, they might have to be, but sometimes family does not always have the answer. Sometimes we have to bring other people in to really assist us in finding ways to get to solutions, or maybe finding other safe places and safe spaces to deal with some things that are going on with us. Can I communicate effectively right now? If not, do I need to process this feeling first, kind of de-escalate, get it down before I start to talk? Because the emotional brain, like in the way that the brain works, I would say, like, see it like a neighborhood. When that message of something happening is sent out in the brain, the first house is the emotional house. Logic lives down the road, right? So sometimes we have to allow time for the message to say whatever it needs to say to that emotional house as it gets us all riled up. Breathe, take a moment, let it get down to logic, and let's start seeing, is this real? Like, it feels like a threat, but is it a threat? It feels like I'm going to be harmed, but am I actually going to be harmed? It just feels that way, right? It feels like everything's falling apart, but is it, right? Sometimes I'll have clients and they're like, it's done this. I'm like, calm down. Do you still have your arms, right? Do you still have your legs, right? That's really a grounding process to bring them back in their body, but it helps them to stop thinking about all the shoulda, coulda, wouldas and focus right on answering the fear. Is it really going to destroy everything? Are you actually falling apart? If your hands and your arms and legs are all still there, and then your breath is present, we can get the mind clear, and now we're back in the body, grounded. Let's actually process this without the emotion driving and telling us all the lies of the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. Are there other ways of addressing the issue? Can I work the problem myself? Should we accept that there is no resolution? And using relaxation, grounding, centering, mindfulness, or calming skills. And that's always important, because it really does ground you back in your body, because when that emotional process happens, it's so intangible. It got so many shoulda, coulda, wouldas that you will literally be like in 3rd and 4th levels of the world. So you have to bring yourself back to the moment so that you can focus on what's actually happening and not what you are fearing may happen just because fear is present in the room. Fear is just to decide if we will survive or not. Having an answer, I will survive and I am fully intact, is the answer, right? Use I statements. I feel afraid. I don't know what's going to happen, right? Not you did and you could and you made me feel, right? Okay, that's still saying that the power to make this resolution or solution happen is outside of me. So you will establish your own disappointment and your own powerlessness, right? So we have to bring back the I statements. We have to center and breathe, and then figure out what power and controls do I have, and how can I make what I want happen, or what needs am I looking to be met? How can I make that happen with what it is that I know or the people that I can connect with? But we have to bring that back to ourselves. And no judgment, no grudges, right? We can't expect people to give us what we can't first give to ourselves. Right, so we can't hold grudges and say they should have done, they should have given, they should have known. Well, they're a human being as well. They're not a God, right? They're not our creators. They're not, right? So we can't hold grudges because people can't give us exactly what it is that we're looking for. Sometimes we have to accept they don't have capacity and capability, right? And forgiveness is not about accepting people's bad behaviors. It's releasing them from our idea that they have a power that they do not. And it actually allows the power to come back to you to be able to figure out and give yourself what it is that you're looking for. So forgiveness is the release. Forgiveness is the release, right? And that's really hard for people because they really believe, well, I'm going to let them go and then we're supposed to forget it. You don't ever have to forget it. Sometimes you're supposed to never forget that this person is harmful. But what I am doing is releasing them from being different because they can't be, because if they could, they would. Right? Intimidation and fear do not gain respect or regard. It actually matches fire. Right? So that's one of the reasons also to let it go. Why? Because it's only going to escalate. It's not going to get me what I'm looking for. So expression, suppression, calming, 3 approaches to anger. I know we're at time. I'm just going to go through these and then we'll be done. So expressing is actually the healthiest. A lot of times when I ask people which ones they think are the healthiest, they'll say calming, right? Well, calming actually is beneficial with expression, but it's actually not the healthiest. Expressing is, because anger is an energy, and as we were showing, it takes on every aspect of your body. So if you don't deal with that, it still settles in your body. It still settles in your mind, and it creates all those stories in your subconscious. So you have to express it so we can gain clarity on what it is, why it is, and also why whatever the circumstance, situation, or person is not the solution of resolving and dealing with what it is I am dealing with internally, interpersonally. So we want to make sure we're expressing, asserting whatever we can without being aggressive, being respectful of ourselves and others, and clearly expressing what needs and issues we have without hurting ourselves or others. And this is really important too, because we find ways of dealing with this. It doesn't always have to be dealt with the other person or other people. It can be dealt with through journaling, through talking with a therapist or a family member or a pastor, priest, or whomever you respect that might have more answers. Daily relaxation and exercise techniques and plans and mindfulness practices actually allow us to find ways of establishing. And so when we feel out of sorts, it's easier to go back to it. So that's why mindfulness and grounding and exercise beginning of the day, because the way the mind works, whatever it establishes in the beginning of the day feels like groundwork. And your mind will always kind of remember the things that you did and thought and said at the beginning of the day, and it will want to go back to it. because it will remind ourselves, well, at the beginning of the day when we got up, you said we were calm. You said that we were love. You said that we were peace, right? And this situation doesn't look like that, right? So sometimes getting up and reading the stories and watching the news, that actually can fuel that, oh my God, the world's on fire. So every time we're interacting with other people, we start to believe the world's on fire, and it's confirming those thoughts we had at the beginning of the day, right? Expressing and bottling up, you can't restrain anger. You cannot suppress anger. It will find a way of expressing itself. For the moment, sometimes you can redirect towards something more constructive, or you can focus on something else, but eventually you will have to deal with it because there's a message and a meaning underneath, right? Whether it's my trauma, whether it's my history, whether it's my sadness, there's something underneath. Calming, once again, calming until your heart rate decreases in the moment, able to think clear, mindful and grounding in the moment, gain control of internal and external feelings and the expression of them. This is why this is important to not do on its own, because we kind of lying to ourselves that all I need to do is just calm down and not actually deal with what's going on. That means it's going to happen again, right? So what you'll do is just keep calming yourself and going back up and calming yourself and going back up, right? So calming and expressing actually work really well together because there's honesty in it, right? There's honesty in what's going on, and then there's honesty in knowing it's not worth all the feelings and emotions and the destructions that's about to happen. So I'll just calm myself and get really clear on what's happening and deal with that, because this moment is just an awareness moment. It's not my real life, and it's not an indictment on me or the other person or the circumstance, situation, or circumstance. So cognitive restructuring, changing the way you think, replacing some of your thoughts, restructuring or reframing them, not using extreme language. And that's what a lot of times people are doing. This always happens. They always say this. No one ever sees me. They always, right? So that is a language that's telling your mind, that subconscious, this is happening again. This is happening again. And anger's like, we said we weren't going to let this happen again, right? So you actually can start to cause yourself to hype higher and higher and further down that line toward rage, right? So being really mindful of, this is happening right now. It doesn't happen all the time. It didn't happen yesterday. So I need to deal with this moment, right? This person is driving me crazy right now, but I don't have to see them in the next hour, right? Like those types of conversations where the extreme always and nevers and all of that, it allows us to once again focus, be mindful, not allow the past to drive us, not allow the emotions to drive us, but allowing logic to inform us, and let the present moment be quite clear to give us focus and direction where we're trying to go. And that can also be assisted with breathing, calming words, think before you speak. Imagery, sometimes I have people have little stickies or pictures of what they want to do and where they want to go. Vision boards are really good because it lets you know this moment, not worth it. This person, not worth it. The screaming, fussing, fighting, all of that, not getting me what it is that I need. I already know where I'm going. I already know what I need to do. And I know the steps of making that happen. This situation, distraction, not worth it. I have to let it go. Why? I got places to go, people to see, and babies to kiss, right? So yoga, self-care is really important. Why? Because it allows you to establish a narrative about who you are, so that when you're dealing with circumstance, situations, and people, you're not feeling like you have to fight those things because it makes you feel like you're not who you think you are. I already know who I am because it's spent time with me, right? I love myself. I take care of myself. I have told myself what value I have. So this person saying these things, they actually mean nothing to me, right? This circumstance that's saying you're the last on the list, cool, last on that list, but I'm not last on the list in my life, right? So establishing your self-care pattern establishes your narrative and your self-practices. And practice makes perfect. So self-care is always important. Learn how to solve your problems. I always tell people, solve them in small ways, right? This allows you to let go and really move fully in your life. If you don't know how to say no, go to a fast food restaurant, ask for, they say you want ketchup, say no, even if you want it. Just learn how to say no so that you can interrupt the process of constantly saying yes, right? You want bread on your table? No, you might want it, but say no. Feel the experience of being uncomfortable and know that it's not going to kill you to be uncomfortable. It's not going to kill you to not have something, right? So learning how to practice and be okay with the things that make you uncomfortable will allow you to let things go as they are bigger and more impactful in your life. Improve communication, listen to understand, respond, focus on the point at hand. Don't try to fight all the other times that this situation has occurred in your life. Humor, change environments, walk away, ease up on yourself. I always tell people when you're having these internal fights and you're beating yourself up, it looks like when I'm talking to people, like they're literally beating themselves in the face. That is the most disheartening thing. No one deserves to just stand around and beat themselves in the face in front of everyone. That's not the audience we want to create for ourselves, right? Forgiveness, not for the other person, is to let us go from situations that do not serve us. Counseling if you need it, and assertive training if you do need to establish boundaries, so that we don't have to use words and hands, but we can use our words to benefit us and create boundaries and self-protections for those situations, circumstances, or people we find are bad actors. Okay, there we go. It's a little after 2. Questions?
Really a lot to unpack there. My gosh. I mean, anger is such a diffuse, but it's such a universal concept, but yet there's so many different ways it manifests and so many different problems that cause us to get angry. So, and each one creates a kind of a strategic way to try to deal with that anger. But yet the skill sets are always the same. And that one caveat you have, the healthiest way to deal with anger is learning to skillfully express what you're feeling. So learning to be assertive and setting those boundaries ties back to our boundary classes we've been going over. But the assertiveness training is really the ability to, it's a self-care skill where you will literally set boundaries with people by identifying your feelings, by identifying your triggers, and kind of articulating what those are, even if they're from the past. I have this problem, honey, or I have this problem because I'm always feeling like this happens, but it could be something from the past, but I want you to be aware of it. But I respect you, so let's have this conversation. So it's like, you know, the idea of the assertiveness training, that next caveat of respect for the other person and respect for yourself. So you're going to articulate and then skillfully go out and talk about the feelings. What is underneath the feelings of anger? Am I being trespassed on? Do I feel like, you know, I'm being abused? Whatever it is. And then go deeper to the fear and the longing. What is it, the longing that you'd like to see differently in this interaction? What are you looking for? What is the need that needs to be fulfilled? That's all a huge skill set, but isn't it what we're here to learn? Yeah. And it's just, you did a beautiful job pulling all this stuff together, and it's just the practicing, you know, the idea of practicing in specific conflicts. It'd be interesting to hear, you know, from people, maybe we don't have time in this one, but hearing a specific types of conflicts and how to unpack that skillfully.
Yeah.
I second what Nancy has said. It was so much information. I love the fact of, you know, taking our action and identifying some of these things and even just putting it into practice so we become better. And I just kept hearing towards the end, you know, it's really for us. It's really for us to let go. Life goes on. Let's move forward. Let's press forward with, of course, what we need to do for ourselves instead of, you know, dwelling in the anger and not necessarily changing anything, you know, being in that space. So, you know, thank you, Dr. Shelton. I really look forward to having you back, maybe even for part 2 or a follow-up on anger management, the art of letting go, the action pack part, right? The action skills part of actually putting it into practice. What do we do? How do we take those necessary steps? So I truly appreciate you. I know the chat had some thumbs up and I saw a lot of heads noddings and things like that throughout. So we thank you again today for this session, Dr. Shelton, and we really look forward for having you back. We want to see you again. Please come out.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you.